They were bold, they were wild, and in some cases, they were downright impossible. Ford built them in secret, tested them behind closed doors, and then slammed the brakes. No showroom launch, no glossy ad campaigns, just whispers and a few grainy photos. Why? Sometimes politics, sometimes fear, sometimes the world just wasn't ready. But what if they had been? Let's dig into 11 banned cars Ford built but never released, and see the ghosts they left behind. 1966 Ford Cougar 2 concept. Imagine walking into an auto show in 1966 and seeing something that looked like a European supercar wearing a Ford badge. That was the Cougar 2, a low, sleek two-seater with curves that could make a Ferrari glance twice. It wasn't a gimmicky styling exercise either. Underneath its shimmering fiberglass skin was a modified AC Cobra chassis and a small block V8 with real bite. This wasn't the typical big boxy Ford of the mid-60s. This was lean, fast, and ready to take a swipe at Chevrolet's Corvette. The proportions were all wrong for a Ford of the time, in the best way. Long hood, tight rear deck, pop-up headlights, and a wraparound windshield that screamed speed. Showgoers were stunned. It didn't have the chrome excess or exaggerated fins of other 60s dream cars. It looked like it could be driven straight out of the display hall and onto a racetrack. But Ford's own success became its biggest obstacle. The Thunderbird was printing money as a luxury cruiser, and the newly launched Mustang was on its way to becoming an icon. A Corvette rival could steal sales from both and risk diluting the company's carefully built image. Executives decided it was too risky. The Cougar name survived, slapped onto Mercury's Mustang-based pony car instead. But the Cougar 2 itself was quietly locked away in Ford's archives. Looking back, it's hard not to wonder how it might have rewritten American sports car history. Could it have forced Chevy to rethink the Corvette earlier? Could it have pushed Ford into a new era of world-class performance machines? We'll never know. What we do know is that for one brief moment, Ford had a car that could go toe-to-toe with Europe's finest, and they let it vanish. Ford GN34. Early 1980s. The GN34 wasn't just a car, it was Ford's moonshot. The plan? Build an American supercar that could eat Corvettes for breakfast and still have enough swagger to make Ferrari nervous. And they weren't doing it alone. Ford teamed up with Ital Design, the legendary Italian studio responsible for some of the most jaw-dropping shapes in automotive history. The result was stunning, low, sharp, and exotic. The GN34 looked like it belonged on the French Riviera, not parked in front of a Detroit diner. Beneath the aluminum and composite body, Ford stuffed a twin-turbocharged V6, a hot-rodded version of the Yamaha engine later found in the Taurus SHO. In some versions, it was tuned for over 300 horsepower, a big deal in the early 80s. And because Ford was feeling extra ambitious, they gave it all-wheel drive. In that era, only a handful of European cars had it, and it was mostly the domain of rally machines. Test drivers who got behind the wheel swore it felt like nothing else American. Explosive acceleration, razor-sharp steering, and the kind of balance that made carving corners addictive. It wasn't just fast, it was sophisticated. So what happened? Reality showed up. Building a low-volume, exotic AWD sports car was going to cost a fortune. Executives fretted about reliability, serviceability, and whether anyone would pay Ferrari money for a Ford badge. By the mid-80s, the mood had shifted. Family sedans and trucks were the priority. The GN34 was deemed an expensive distraction. Most prototypes were destroyed. Ital Design's sketches were boxed up. Today, the GN34 survives only in rumors, a few photos, and the memories of engineers who still insist it could have been a game changer. Maybe they're right. In a different world, the GN34 might have redefined what an American supercar could be. In ours, it became another ghost in Ford's closet. 1971 Ford Mustang Milano. The muscle car era was at full roar in the early 70s, but the winds were already starting to shift. Ford's designers knew it, and with the Mustang Milano, they swung for the fences. This wasn't just another pony car with racing stripes. This was Ford imagining what would happen if a Mustang took a long vacation in Monaco and came back with an Italian wardrobe. The Milano sat impossibly low, drenched in an ultraviolet purple paint that shifted in the light like it was alive. The roofline flowed seamlessly into a razor-edged tail, while hidden headlights peeked out from a full-width grille. It had side vents, sculpted fenders, and proportions that whispered Maserati and Ferrari more than Main Street America. Even the stance seemed ready to pounce. Underneath, it still had Mustang DNA, V8 power, rear-wheel drive, but the style was a complete departure from the Detroit norm. Crowds at auto shows couldn't get enough. Some Ford insiders quietly talked about borrowing its hidden headlights and sleek roofline for production models. But the timing was terrible. Insurance companies were slapping huge premiums on performance cars. New crash safety rules were killing design features like hidden headlights, and the first tremors of the oil crisis were rattling the industry. Ford's executives were getting nervous. Instead of moving forward with a bold new GT-style Mustang, they went the other way, smaller, safer, and aimed squarely at survival. The Milano was rolled back into storage and never heard from again. What we got instead was the Mustang II. Let's just say no one's hanging posters of that on their garage wall. The Milano stands as a tantalizing what-if, proof that, at the brink of change, Ford briefly dreamed of a Mustang that could rival Europe's best, before reality shut the door. 1991 Gia Focus Concept. Forget what you know about the Focus you eventually saw at your local dealership. The Gia Focus Concept was a completely different animal, a mid-engine, glass-roofed urban spacecraft disguised as a car. Unveiled in 1991, it looked like something that rolled straight out of a sci-fi movie set. It wasn't just pretty for the sake of being pretty. The Gia Focus was an actual running prototype created by Ford's Italian design arm, Gia. It had a compact engine tucked behind the seats, freeing up the front for storage and safety crumple zones. Overhead, a massive glass canopy bathed the cabin in light, giving passengers the feeling of sitting inside a moving observatory. Inside, it was pure futurism. Digital displays, sculptural seats, and a minimalist dashboard that made the cars of the day look ancient. Engineers even toyed with hybrid drive systems and energy recovery features years before hybrids hit the mainstream. The Gia Focus wasn't about muscle. It was about agility, efficiency, and bringing tomorrow into the present. It worked too. Prototypes actually drove, turning heads and sparking conversation wherever they went. But Ford's leadership balked. The SUV boom was taking off, customers were still buying big sedans, and the fear of a radical flop outweighed the excitement. By the time the Focus name finally reached production in 1998, it was stuck on a safe, front-wheel drive compact hatchback, a fine car, but nothing like the jaw-dropping concept. Today, the Gia Focus feels like a postcard from an alternate universe, a world where Ford wasn't afraid to push design and engineering past the comfort zone. In this one, it's just another dream car locked away in history. 1973 Mustang Super Stallion prototype. By the early 70s, the golden age of muscle cars was sputtering. Insurance premiums were through the roof, emissions regulations were tightening, and the oil crisis was right around the corner. Most automakers started shrinking engines and chasing fuel economy. But in a quiet corner of Ford's engineering department, a small team had other plans. The Mustang Super Stallion prototype. This wasn't a gas-guzzling dinosaur. Instead, it packed a smaller 4.9-liter V8, bolstered by a turbocharger, a technology that was still exotic in American cars at the time. The goal? Keep the performance, ditch the inefficiency. Engineers reworked the block to handle the boost, tuned the turbo to spool quickly, and paired it with serious weight reduction, thinner panels, simplified interiors, and a revised suspension. The result was a Mustang that felt sharper, quicker, and more precise than its big-engine brothers. Test drivers loved it. The turbo didn't hit like a hammer. It built power smoothly, making the car easier to control at speed. It was still brutal in a straight line, but far more agile in the corners. For a moment, it looked like the Mustang could evolve into something leaner and meaner, perfectly adapted to the new automotive landscape. Then, the corporate hammer came down. Turbo tech was seen as too risky for a mass-market Mustang. Dealer service training would be a nightmare, and the marketing team feared alienating buyers who wanted old-school V8 thunder. The project was shelved, and Ford went back to safer, naturally aspirated engines. It would be another decade before turbo Mustangs finally hit the market. By then, the chance to rewrite the muscle car's story had long passed. The Super Stallion became yet another Ford, what could have been. Proof that even in the face of change, the company once had the nerve to imagine a different future. 1964 Ford Aurora. The early 60s were obsessed with the future. The The space race was in full swing. Rockets dominated magazine covers, and every car company wanted to look like it had just rolled off a lunar landing pad. Ford's most outrageous contribution to that vision was the Aurora, a concept so far ahead of its time it made other show cars look like stage props. The centerpiece was its massive bubble canopy, a sweeping dome of acrylic that covered the entire passenger compartment. From the outside, it looked like a rolling greenhouse crossed with a spaceship. From the inside, it was pure panoramic magic, sunlight everywhere, and nothing between you and the world but a clear shell. The seating layout encouraged conversation, and the whole interior was designed to feel open and social instead of cramped and driver-focused. Underneath, Ford ditched the traditional front-engine setup for a rear-mounted power plant, freeing up space and improving balance. Safety engineers even toyed with early crumple zone concepts, hoping the Aurora could survive impacts better than anything else on the road. It wasn't just for show. This was Ford trying to build a safer, more forward-thinking car without sacrificing style. But then reality stepped in. The bubble canopy couldn't pass emerging rollover standards. The rear engine layout would have been a nightmare for dealers to service, and mass-producing something this unconventional would have cost a fortune. Ford pulled the plug. The Aurora was retired to photo archives and the occasional museum display, a perfect relic of an era when Detroit designers still thought we'd all be driving glass-domed spaceships by 1980. It stands as proof that sometimes the future arrives in style and then gets locked away. 1990 Ford Probe GT AWD Turbo Prototype. In the late 80s and early 90s, Japanese sport compacts were dominating the scene. Cars like the Mitsubishi Eclipse GSX and Subaru XT were packing turbo power and all-wheel drive, leaving most American coupes looking out of touch. Ford's answer: a secret prototype that combined both the Probe GT AWD Turbo. On the outside, it looked sleek and futuristic, with smooth aero lines and a purposeful stance. Under the hood sat a heavily boosted 2.2-liter four-cylinder, intercooled and tuned to punch far above its weight. Power went to all four wheels through a sophisticated AWD system that could send torque where it was needed most. This wasn't just a straight-line machine. It had grip for days, sticking to corners like glue. Test drivers raved about it. Acceleration was quick and seamless, the steering was razor-sharp, and the all-wheel drive system made it feel locked to the pavement. In an era where American sporty often meant heavy and tail-happy, the Probe GT AWD Turbo felt like a precision tool. And that was the problem. Internally, Ford worried it would outshine the Mustang, their sacred performance icon. Add in the extra cost of building and maintaining a turbo AWD system, plus dealer concerns about complexity, and the decision was made. This thing would never see showrooms. Instead, the production Probe that did launch was a safe front-wheel drive coupe aimed at the masses. Not bad, but nowhere near the monster Ford had hiding in its labs. The AWD Turbo prototype remains one of Ford's most tantalizing almosts, the kind of car that could have flipped the performance hierarchy on its head. 2004 Ford Shelby Cobra Concept Daisy. Sometimes a concept car isn't about the future. It's about pure, unfiltered nostalgia. That was the Shelby Cobra concept, affectionately nicknamed Daisy. In 2004, Ford decided to see what would happen if they stripped away all the modern luxury fluff and built a roadster as raw and wild as the original 60s Cobra. The result was a hand-built aluminum body draped over a chassis with a naturally aspirated V10 at its heart. No turbos, no hybrid trickery, just 10 cylinders of unfiltered mechanical fury. Ford even brought Carroll Shelby himself in to drive it, and he reportedly gave it his blessing, which, for Cobra fans, is about as good as sainthood. The whole point of Daisy was purity. No traction control safety net, no touchscreen distractions, just a steering wheel, a shifter, and enough torque to rearrange your weekend plans. It was a rolling love letter to an era when driving was dangerous, visceral, and gloriously loud. But by 2004, the world was changing fast. Emissions rules were tightening. The market was leaning toward practical performance, and a low-volume, hand-built aluminum roadster didn't make financial sense. Producing Daisy would have been a massive risk for a tiny niche market. So instead of going into production, Daisy was tucked into Ford's collection. Today, it's remembered as a high-octane what if. A moment when Ford had both the heritage and the hardware to bring back a legend and chose to keep it a dream. 1958 Ford Nucleon. If there's one Ford concept that sounds like a late-night sci-fi plot, it's the Nucleon. In the late 1950s, nuclear energy was being pitched as the answer to everything: power plants, ships, submarines, and yes, even cars. Ford's designers decided to imagine a personal vehicle powered by its very own miniature nuclear reactor. The Nucleon's body looked like a jet-age rocket on wheels, sweeping tail fins, a bubble-like cockpit, and a sleek low profile that seemed built for a futuristic cityscape. Behind the passenger cabin sat the power capsule, a theoretical reactor that, in Ford's fantasy, could go thousands of miles before needing refueling. No gas stations, no oil changes, just pure atomic cruising. Of course, none of this ever actually worked. In reality, miniaturizing a reactor small enough for a car while shielding passengers from radiation was, and still is, a monumental challenge. The lead shielding alone would have weighed more than the car itself. Then there were the obvious safety nightmares. An accident in a nuclear-powered car would make even the worst gas fires look like a camp stove mishap. It didn't take long for regulators and common sense to shut down the dream. Civilian nuclear vehicles were outright banned in most countries, and the Nucleon never made it past a static model. Still, it remains one of the most outrageous what-ifs in automotive history, the kind of idea that could only have been dreamed up during a time when people thought the atomic age would solve everything. Today, it's a museum piece. No running engine, no real-world miles. Just a wild reminder that sometimes the future looks cool on paper, but absolutely terrifying in practice. 1987 Ford Escort RS700T. Group B rally racing in the 1980s was motorsport at its most insane and most dangerous. Manufacturers were building ultra-light, ultra-powerful machines that were barely tamed by regulations. Ford's contender for this high-stakes arms race was the Escort RS700T, a turbocharged rear-wheel drive rocket aimed at dominating gravel, tarmac, and snow stages alike. It was a brute of a car. Turbocharged power under the hood, lightweight body panels, and a chassis tuned for maximum aggression. Ford's engineers wanted something nimble and wild, a machine that rewarded fearless drivers and punished hesitation. It was meant to be the evolution of their rally program, a car that could go head-to-head with legends from Audi, Lancia, and Peugeot. And then the walls came crashing down. In 1986, after a series of horrific accidents, the FIA announced the end of Group B. Overnight, the Escort RS700T became obsolete. It had been built for a category that no longer existed. All that money, all that engineering, all those long hours, gone in a single rule change. Ford pulled the plug immediately. A few prototypes survived, but most were dismantled or hidden away. The RS700T never got the chance to roar in competition, never got the muddy, sideways glory it was designed for. Today, it's one of those mythical rally cars fans whisper about, a machine built for a level of motorsport so extreme, the sport itself couldn't survive it. 1972 Ford Ecostar. Long before electric cars became a Silicon Valley obsession, Ford quietly built one that could have changed the game. The 1972 Ecostar was a fully functional electric delivery van, designed around sodium-sulfur battery technology that, in theory, offered far greater range than the lead-acid setups of the time. It wasn't flashy. The Ecostar's boxy practical design was all about cargo space and urban maneuverability. The magic was under the skin, an electric motor delivering instant torque and a battery system that promised extended range, perfect for city delivery routes. Ford even put prototypes into limited real-world testing. But sodium-sulfur batteries have a nasty quirk. They operate at extremely high temperatures, over 300 degrees Celsius. That meant any failure in the system could lead to dangerous chemical fires. And during testing, that's exactly what happened. Several prototypes suffered thermal runaway, the kind of problem that makes corporate lawyers break into a sweat. Ford's leadership didn't need to be told twice. The project was shut down, the prototypes were destroyed, and the Ecostar quietly disappeared from the company's future plans. It would be decades before electric commercial vehicles came back into the spotlight. In hindsight, the Ecostar was way ahead of its time, but also a reminder that pioneering tech can be a risky, messy business. It could have made Ford a leader in EVs decades before anyone else. Instead, it became another ghost in the company's long list of lost innovations. Ford's graveyard of banned cars proves the road to innovation is lined with almosts and what-ifs. Some were too costly, some too risky, and some simply scared the wrong people at the wrong moment. Yet each reveals a Ford unafraid to dream big and challenge the norm until the accountants shut the door. Which of these lost legends would you resurrect? Drop your pick in the comments, hit subscribe, and keep chasing the untold stories of cars we were never meant to drive.